Hello everybody and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host Eric, and this is of course the show where we are reviewing every movie ever made, starting this week with The Village. This is the third or fourth movie from M. Night Shyamalan, a director who by this point in his career had sort of worn out his welcome with me. Now he's sort of won it back a little bit recently with Split, but The Village was one that, when it came out, I wasn't interested in seeing and never did. So this is the first time I saw it. Now, a big part of the reason why M. Night sort of wore out his welcome with me and other viewers is his arguably over-reliance on plot twists, on having a big, reveal near the end of the movie that's supposed to blow the audience's minds. Now, he executed that pretty well with The Sixth Sense, which was a, fine movie with a pretty shocking twist that made everybody go, wow, and made it feel like a great movie, even though, at least in my opinion, it doesn't hold up quite as well on subsequent viewings. He followed that up with Unbreakable, which has sort of a lukewarm plot twist, which I won't reveal, I guess, especially since there's an Unbreakable sequel coming out. But by the time The Village came around, we were hip to his tricks, and to be honest with you, when they started running the commercials for The Village, which is ostensibly a movie about, frontier or colonial era Americans living out in the wilderness, I could see the plot twist coming from a mile away. So I want to go ahead and I want to talk about this movie. So spoiler alert is active. Here's the deal, gang. So this whole movie, which is, is set out in the wilderness and everybody wears old-timey clothing and behaves all old-timey, it actually takes place in the modern day. That's the big twist! And like I say, I remember seeing the commercials for this and being like, this sucker takes place today. There's going to be a plane that flies overhead or something. That's what you're going to know. Now, it's not a plane that flies overhead. Here's the deal. So but the twist is somewhat obvious, and if I have to be honest, is revealed very poorly. The plot of the movie, such as it is that we do have this sort of Salem, Massachusetts-esque wilderness town of elders and youngins. Who they live out in the wilderness and they're not allowed to leave their village because spooky things live out in the woods. And the elders made a pact with the spooky things that so long as the villagers don't go into the woods, the spooky things won't come out of the woods and into the village. Our heroes are Joaquin Phoenix and Bryce Dallas Howard. Bryce is blind, and when Joaquin falls ill, she is the only villager brave enough to venture out into the woods despite her lack of sight to try and make it to the next town and find medicine. When she goes out into the woods, we find out that the story of the spooky people has all been made up by the village elders in an attempt to keep the youth inside of the village. The village elders, you see, had set up this commune sometime in the 70s to escape all the hustle and bustle and I guess murders of our world and, sort of form this pseudo-Amish community, but why not just become Amish? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. And when she makes it out to the highway, we find out that they all live inside of some big nature preserve. Now, the reason why I say that this is revealed poorly is because Bryce Dallas Howard, like I say, is blind. So one, she doesn't see what's going on. Like they put her in a car and she realizes there's something weird about it, but she never is able to look around and go, hey, this is all kinds of crazy. Also, the movie reveals to us that that's what's going on via a conversation between cult leaders John Hurt. I confused John Hurt and William Hurt. I think I have the right Hurt today. And Sigourney Weaver that reveals, oh yeah, this is modern day. And they tell us that right before we see Bryce Dallas Howard meet a modern day park ranger. So even excusing that she can't see the park ranger and his fancy get-up and his technology, it's disappointing that we don't find out the twist through the actions of our protagonist. And as such, it sort of takes the air out of the somewhat already obvious reveal. So whatever suspense or impact it would have had is significantly lessened. So, So how about the movie itself? Even, ignoring the twist, it's okay. It's a watchable enough movie, which is more than I can say for a lot of M. Night's later output. This was one that was easy to watch start to finish, but it is not a particularly good movie. Even ignoring the twist, the plot and characters as they exist are not terribly interesting. So, as such, I gotta tell you, The Village, 2 stars. All right, friends, let's travel off to wonderful Ibiza, the fabled Spanish, I don't know, what is it, an island? I don't know. It's that place where all the hyper-rich go to party these days. It got a side mention in Batman Begins, which is where I think it first hit my radar. It's also the star of one of the great arguments between people and pedants about whether you say it Ibiza or Ibiza. I think I will be a jerk and insist on calling it Ibiza. So this is a comedy film that was a Netflix original starring Gillian Jacobs of Community fame, as well as Richard Madden, who played Robb Stark on Game of Thrones. As the movie goes, it's fine. It was a fun movie. It was a good movie, if not great. There's some good girl comedy in it, as the movie features on Gillian Jacobs and her girlfriends deciding to sort of throw caution to the wind and try and mix work with pleasure and party in Ibiza when Gillian Jacobs is supposed to be going to work meetings. Those scenes where they're trying to party and where friends are trying to talk her into going to parties instead of working, those are a ton of fun. Also, when she eventually meets Robb Stark, who plays a DJ at one of these big parties, and they start a cute, awkward romance, those scenes are terrific. The romance scenes and the girl comedy scenes are a terrific and really fun movie that I really enjoyed. Unfortunately, the rest of the movie gets bogged down with clubbing scenes that last too long, that are largely just shots of people dancing and partying, so they're not terribly interesting or effective, and with long travel scenes of them trying to get from place to place that are themselves, lacking largely in character drama or comedy. So it ends up being a kind of middle-of-the-road movie where there's some really terrific stuff in it I liked a lot, and some stuff in it that is just not bad so much as boring, which is why I'm going to give Ibiza 3 stars. And now it's time for License to Thrill. License to Thrill is, of course, the part of the show where we look back at the career of Agent 007, James Bond himself. And this time we're going to look at Live and Let Die. This is the first movie featuring Roger Moore as James Bond. It features the classic Paul McCartney and Wings song, Live and Let Die. James Bond has to go to New Orleans and to I want to say Caribbean island, to try and stop a plot by drug smugglers who, amongst other things, employ Jane Seymour as a legitimate psychic whose advice they follow in helping them plan their crime sprees. Yaphet Kotto plays the bad guy, Kananga. This is a very good James Bond movie. I would say this is probably the best of the Roger Moore pictures. He's very young and vital in this, and so is the movie. It is very action-oriented and fast-paced. It is a little bit campy, as the Roger Moore movies tend to be, but it hasn't settled into the high camp of movies like The Spy Who Loved Me or Moonraker. So it sort of balances out the visceral action and the campiness very well. This is also a different James Bond movie. It's sort of an outlier because here the Bond franchise is appropriating the blaxploitation genre for its own ends. So it's a different movie in look and feel than most of the other James Bond movies, which helps it stand out a bunch. That supporting cast is pretty terrific too. They're a lot of fun to have around. All of this combines to make a really solidly fun James Bond outing that I have to give 4 stars to. Now let's go on and have a look at a Hollywood classic. Today's Hollywood classic is Brigadoon. This is the big movie musical about a couple of dudes, in particular Gene Kelly, who stumble upon a Scottish village in the Highlands that is magic and only appears for one day every 100 years and then disappears again. The people in the village all know that that's the deal. Gene Kelly does not. He starts a romance with a lady in the village and then has to decide if he wants to stay with her in the village and, you know, go to sleep for 100 years every night, I guess, depends on how you want to look at it, or does he want to return to, our regular modern world. I'd never seen Brigadoon before. I would have to say that it is an affecting movie, emotionally so, if a bit thin. It is very much a fairy tale. There is not a great deal of depth to the film throughout. It does have solid dancing in it and solid music, but not super memorable stuff. So I felt like the singing and dancing were a little weak for a Freed unit musical. By Freed unit, I mean films produced by, I want to say his name is Arthur Freed, who was an exceptional producer of musicals, in particular Singing in the Rain, and was well known for his huge dance numbers and for pushing the envelope formally to create these really exciting and filmic song and dance numbers. So as opposed to other movie musicals, which might just pull the camera back wide and let you watch everybody dancing, Freed is very good at moving his characters around the sets and moving the cameras as well. In Brigadoon, however, that doesn't happen as well. So Brigadoon, for me, is a pretty middle-of-the-road movie, enjoyable, with, like I say, enjoyable songs and dancing and romance, but not terribly great, until the finale. So like I say, this whole thing is building up to, is Gene Kelly going to stay in Brigadoon or not? And obviously we're expecting him to stay in Brigadoon. This is a fairy tale and a movie musical, right? Here's the thing, though. He doesn't. He decides to go back to modern-day America. And the movie doesn't end there. And when the movie takes that pivot, I was honestly a little skeptical of if this was a good idea or not. But from there, we transitioned to him trying to re-assimilate into life in America and being like his job and going to a bar and going on a date with his fiance, who we've known throughout the movie. He's very honest about that. He doesn't like all that much, but he feels obligated to marry her, which is sort of a dicey premise, but we'll set that aside. I'm going to set that over right here for right now. Here's the thing. I ended up loving it. What the movie was lacking in depth up until that point, in the last 15 or 20 minutes, as we watch Gene Kelly racked with regret for the decision he's made and try to decide what to do about it, that is the most emotionally affecting of an already, somewhat enjoyable romance. And that's what hits Brigadoon over the hill a little bit for me and puts it at 3.5 stars. This week in Christmas Corner, we're looking at Journey Back to Christmas. This is, of course, a Hallmark original Christmas movie, which, as we all know, I have an affection for. This one stars Candace Cameron Bure as a World War II era nurse who gets magically transported to our time and falls in love with a fella. Here's the deal, gang. This movie annoyed the bejesus out of me. Because it's ostensibly a time travel romance movie, right? Like Brigadoon, which we just talked about on this show, or Somewhere in Time, which is a movie that we have not talked about, and I hope we don't, because I think it's stupid, but we are reviewing every movie ever, so at some point I'll have to talk about it. But the point is, time travel romance. Ooh, or like Outlander, the truly exceptional show on Starz about a World War I nurse who gets transported back in time to the Scottish Highlands, and there's love and romance and sex and drama. And if you're not watching Outlander, watch Outlander. But let's get back to Journey Back to Christmas. Here's the thing. Candace Cameron Bure travels to the future and then does not care. Now, I'm not saying I need this whole movie to be about her being like, what? The future? Look at that weird car. You guys have cell phones? But we don't get any of that like Marty McFly in the past or the future fun stuff. The most we get is that she's mildly interested that eBay exists and that she can buy a hat on it. But she's never like, what? The romance is also lukewarm. The only other notable thing to point out in this is that Tom Skerritt of Alien fame shows up as an old guy who lives in the town that when he was a little boy knew Candace Cameron and helps her to prove that she really is from the past. But that whole plot line where people think she's a cuckoo bird because she said she's from the past also doesn't really pan out. This is as bad as most of these Hallmark movies honestly are, but with the added annoyance of squandering an at least semi-interesting premise. Journey Back to Christmas, 1.5 stars. Now it's time for Docurama. This is the part of the show where we talk about documentary movies. Today, we're going to talk about Andre the Giant, a documentary which, and I know you're going to find this hard to believe, is all about Andre the Giant. Of course, we're talking about the enormous wrestling icon of the 1980s, also a co-star of The Princess Bride. It's a very interesting portrait of the man and really does a good job of framing him as this generous, gregarious, larger-than-life figure. A guy who I didn't really know a lot about, and while this movie doesn't flesh out his life and his person quite to the degree I would like, it does a very good job. It becomes, if such a thing is possible, it becomes a little bit focused on the wrestling and tends to conflate the real Andre with the character of Andre, although it does a good job of trying to separate those two. So it's a little bit at odds of itself, both of conflating the two and making the point of separating them and saying that who Andre was not necessarily his persona in the ring, but sometimes it was. And it's an interesting aspect to not just his personality, but if the interviews in this movie are to be believed, of many wrestlers, of this sort of confusion about the real them and the ring them, both amongst fans and historians and also amongst themselves. It's something I wish that the movie had spent more time on to flesh out and delineate, but I wouldn't say glosses over, but doesn't get into a ton of depth on it. The movie does spend too much time, however, on three things for me that detract a little bit from telling the man's life story. One, too many interviews with the Hulkster, Hulk Hogan, who is unnecessarily wearing a t-shirt promoting his pasta bar. Hulk Hogan, due to recent words and actions, has become sort of persona non grata, and the amount he's in this was to me as a viewer a little bit distasteful. The same for Vince McMahon, who is not exactly a saint, so having him on the screen so much, sort of a P.T. Barnum figure in his own right, was a little bit obnoxious. Also, the movie spends a lot of time on Andre's tragic heel turn at the end of his career, where he started playing a bad guy. And while there's some real pathos in that for Andre, where he didn't like turning evil and then having the crowds he so loved turn on him, the movie tends to be a little surfacey and plot-driven about that and not go into emotional depth and spends, like I say, a little too much time on it. So it is an interesting portrait. I wish it had been able to find a little bit more depth, but perhaps that's too much to hope for. In any event, solid movie, more than solid even, 3.5 stars. Now it's time for nobody's favorite part of the show. This is the worst of the week. This week's worst of the week, this one really hurt me, gang. It's Batman and Harley Quinn. Now, I feel like I've talked about these movies on the show a little bit before. DC Comics and Warner Brothers Animation have been releasing this whole series of direct-to-DVD animated features featuring their characters. This one features, wait for it, Batman and Harley Quinn, and is arguably an extension of the great and legendary 90s Batman the Animated Series, which is one of the greatest portrayals of Batman in any media, comics, television, or movies, and for people of my age, nerds of my age, and of course for me, a very foundational text, both of my fandom of Batman and my enjoyment of movies and TV and animation. This movie brings back Kevin Conroy as Batman. It brings back the guy who plays Robin as Robin, now grown up into Nightwing. Unfortunately, Arlene Sorkin, who created the role of Harley Quinn, who is the Joker's henchwoman, and who began as a character even in Batman the Animated Series and proved so popular that she's now in comic books and even in feature films. Arlene Sorkin, who did such great work in that voice role, she is retired from voice acting. And so they replaced her in this with Melissa Rauch of Big Bang Theory. And Melissa Rauch is not a good Harley Quinn. Where Arlene Sorkin was immediately engaging and electric and endearing, Melissa Rauch is grating and obnoxious. It does not help her that the script for this is honestly bad, with a terrible plot revolving around Batman and Harley Quinn trying to stop Poison Ivy and an obscure character, Jason Woodrue, the Floronic Man, for you comic nerds out there, from turning the entire world into plants. I mean, there's a compelling reason, I guess, that Batman needs Harley to track down Poison Ivy, but it's such a plot that's divorced from Harley herself, really, that it doesn't make you feel like this movie has a reason for being. Add to that the movie tries to be funny, but in such a juvenile and prurient way, really appealing to the worst of the 14-year-old boys out there, with a script absolutely stuffed to the gills with sex jokes, and fart jokes. It just doesn't, like a Batman movie with fart jokes, it's tone deaf, honestly. It's not offensive, certainly, but it does not work in the world as established. It takes that great Batman animated series, which was a show for children, but had such wonderful adult sensibilities, and really brings it down to a very juvenile 14-year-old boy level that was very unappealing. The movie, in order to be, it's barely feature length, it's 70-some minutes. To make that 70 minutes, they pad the heck out of this thing with at least 2 songs, including Harley singing a Blondie song, which if Arlene Sorkin had done it, probably would have been great. With Melissa Rauch doing it is sort of annoying, and like I say, they play the whole song. So it doesn't add any depth to the characters or anything to the plot. It's just extraneous and padding. The only thing going for this movie, outside of being ably animated and the welcome return of Kevin Conroy, who, let's face it, has never really left as Batman, he does Batman's voice in a lot of these, is that this movie features a plot thing that I never thought I'd get to say, and that's a Deus Ex Swamp Thing, where instead of a Deus Ex Machina, where something comes out of left field to resolve the plot, this time that thing that comes out of left field is Swamp Thing, who gets a little bit of name mention earlier in the movie and then just shows up at the end to solve all of Batman's problems. It's a really bad movie, which is saying a lot because this whole group of DC direct-to-DVD movies have largely been bad. I can't recall a particularly good one in the bunch. Well, that Suicide Squad one was at least okay. This was pretty painful. 1.5 stars. Let's do our best to forget the sins of the worst of the week and rejuvenate ourselves with the best of the bunch. I'm very excited to talk to you guys about this week's best of the bunch. It is Annihilation. Now, this is a movie that I had heard very good things about, and I'm very happy to say really knew nothing about it going into it, except that this was the sci-fi movie starring largely ladies, led by Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman can be a bit of a hit or a miss actress, and her success or failure, I think a lot of times depends on the material. You give her something like Black Swan, and she's going to, pardon the pun, fly to new heights. You give her something like Attack of the Clones, and you're going to get a boring performance out of a boring role. Annihilation, I'm happy to say, is more of the former, where Natalie is given a truly exceptional script and really knocks it out of the park. Now, she is largely playing a stoic character, but there are plenty of points in the script here where she gets to show not just determination, but some also very real emotion, and she does excellent with it. She blending the, sort of the action hero stoicism with real strong, female emotion is such a lousy thing to say. I'm sorry about that. But it's what I'm trying to get at is that she's able to bring an emotionality to it that is distinctly feminine, not in any kind of a derogatory way, but in the sense of a worldview and a way of engaging with her surroundings. This movie is a very solid suspense film. The plot of it, such as it is Natalie Portman's husband is an army guy and he's gone missing. So she leads a group of scientist soldiers into this sort of anomalous bubble that has appeared on the West Coast in an attempt to find him and all of the other soldiers that have gone in before, and also to find out what's going on. So Portman is able, with her character, to blend this desire to find out what happened to her man with genuine scientific curiosity and also with a determination to protect herself and those in her party. So that the movie isn't just about a woman trying to find her man, as many movies in this vein would be, but about her also wanting her own, fulfillment and to pursue her own interests and needs within the structure of the plot. The movie itself is very filmic and surreal, particularly at the end. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. But it's a movie that needs to be watched. And in that way, it's very much like, especially at the end, like 2001, where it has this ending that is gorgeous to look at, but offers no easy answers. Like I say, there's a lot of solid suspense in this as our heroes move through this anomalous area that has caused all of these interesting genetic mutations amongst the flora and fauna, and you're never sure what they're going to encounter and what's going to happen next. Add to that some truly unsettling creatures. There are monsters in this movie, again, that I don't want to spoil for you, but which are some of the most, honestly, deeply disturbing on a visceral level in a way that I'm not sure if we've seen in a movie since the original Alien. Not all, but largely female cast is tremendous. In addition to Portman, you have Jennifer Jason Leigh. You have the lady, I'm sorry, her name escapes me, who's so wonderful in television's Jane the Virgin. You also have Emma Thompson, who was just recently Valkyrie in Thor Ragnarok and has a great role on Westworld. This is a tremendous group of actresses, and all of them are doing some of the work of their career in this. This is an absolute must-see movie. If you are a fan of science fiction movies, this is a real heady science fiction movie. If you're a fan of action suspense thrillers, this has action and suspense in spades. And if you're just a fan of great actresses or movies with strong female leads, this movie has that. Those of us who are interested in film criticism talk a lot about the male gaze, which is the idea that whatever movie you're watching, you are seeing through the point of view of a male character. And if the movie features a female character, oftentimes they are sort of remade as being essentially a male character with a different name to sort of conform to those ideas. This is the rare movie that I think is providing things through a truly female gaze, which is what I was trying to get to earlier. Everything about it, and especially about Portman's character, allows you to experience things in that way that I don't think we see in cinemas very often. And it helps to make Annihilation not just a great movie, but I think perhaps a real all-timer. Annihilation, 4.5 stars. That's going to do it for this episode of Every Movie Ever. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back next time, and we're going to keep watching every movie ever made.